Good morning and welcome to the 3B Report. I'm Cameron.
And I'm Kellen. Today is Wednesday, March 21st, 2012. We have a guest in the building.
Mrs. Silverman has authored many books.
Speaking of books, today's Guess Which Book contest is...
Chester Raccoon stood at the edge of the forest and cried. "I don't want to go to school," he told his mother. "I want to stay home with you."
Here are the winners of 3B Awards this week.
Okay, these are the winners for the 3B Awards. In Mrs. Beber's class, we have Isabella and Isabella. In Mrs. DeGrand's class, we have Jillian. Congratulations. In Mrs. Amanda Moore's class, we have Ayush. And in Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williams' class, we have Reese, Travis, and Hayden. Congratulations.
Michael V. from Mrs. Cargill's class.
Samuel J. from Mrs. Williams and Miller's class.
Ellis M. from Mrs. Cargill's class.
That's my brother. Isabella L. from Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williams' class.
JD from Mrs. Marshall's class.
Marcelo B. from Mrs. Marl's class.
Aaron F. from Mrs. Youngbloom's class.
Julia C. from Mrs. Couric.
Lewis B. from Mrs. Moore.
Lainey M. from Mrs. DeGrand's class.
Emma A. from Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williamson's class.
Emily S. from Mrs. Marshall's class.
Audrey D., Mrs. DeGrand's room. Sam M., Mrs. Marshall's room. Zachary M., Mrs. Youngbloom's room. Josie S., Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williamson's room. Grace B., Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williamson's room. Ryan S., Mrs. Raff's room. Blake W., Mrs. Raff's room. And Drew M., Mrs. DeGrand's room.
Perfect. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, the first B award is Sam from Mrs. Youngbloom's class. Jake from Mrs. Miller and Williamson. Nolan from Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Williamson. Cameron from Mrs. Miller and Williamson. Nora from Mrs. Raft. Mrs. Moore's third grade class. Mrs. Miranda Moore. Landon from Mrs. A. Moore's class. And Luke from Mrs. Marshall's
Today's
class.
lunch choices are soft or hard taco or stuffed crust pizza.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the Resolution of Respect.